All right. Hello, everyone. Brian, City of the Immaculata, back with you with a short one here today. I'm going to come back with one of my quick tips for studying history. And with these, I'm always going to try to keep them very short, 10, 15 minutes at most. And if it's things that, you history buffs out there are well aware of, and I'm speaking elementary to you, I apologize. This is for those of you that may just beginning to study history, or maybe you've been at it for a while, and it's just a little tip that you may find helpful. We study history sometimes as a science, and I feel like with the other sciences that are out there, we get all these preliminary, like you're not studying calculus until you've done algebra or pre-algebra and pre-cal and all of these things, right? But with history, we just dive right in without having certain considerations. So I just wanted to take some time here with this. And one consideration I want you to have as you go in to study history is this idea that I'm calling classification as oversimplification. Now, the first thing I want to say is that classification is actually a really good thing. It has helped us in the West to progress by leaps and bounds in the sciences. I mean, we're the inheritors of Aristotle in his series of classifications in the physical realm and in the metaphysical realm that has helped us to think through certain facts of reality. Even his epistemology and his classifications there have been extremely helpful to us, all the way on up through to like a Linnaeus and his classifications of animals, which was sort of a breakthrough for modern day science, right? And in science, from the day that you walk in, you're dealing with classifications. I mean, you've got the periodic table in your very first chemistry class that you might walk into, or breaking down plant life and animal life from inorganic life. All of these things, right? So right off the bat, I don't want to discredit classification. It does help us, but the reality is that as classifications, we should use them to help us mark out certain instances of reality that we want to make statements of, but we always have to realize that those statements are generalizations at best. And in theology, we are particularly prone to making classifications of, even just something like religion in general, and thinking that we can say something that's universal, when in reality it's a much more complex, at times chaotic process. This thing that human beings do that we call religion is something that's like it's an impulse that's innate to us. We as Catholics would say, obviously, we were created with an inclination, a telos back towards the divine, but it's there across the board. So we want to be able to say like universal things about us, but in practice, in reality, once you start looking at the individual religious practices, you get some wide diversity across the spectrum. In the Catholic Church, we're actually kind of spoiled, and people sort of, when I first bring this up to people, sometimes if they don't understand what I'm getting at, they get like a big question mark over their head. But in the Catholic Church, we actually have one of the most simplified religions that you could imagine, right? Because in the church, we have made very certain creedal statements, and we have our sacred scriptures codified and finalized, and there is no addition to it. And then we have the creeds, which we have developed over time, but at the same time, right? The Apostles' Creed, the Athanasian Creed, the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed. These are pretty much set in stone at this point. It's not going to be a lot of additions to them, if any, at this point. And then we have our catechisms, coming from like the 15th century or 16th century forward. So we're able to say and classify Catholicism and Christianity and the Protestant and even Eastern Orthodox would kind of fall within this generalization that I'm making right here as well. Even though you do get some diversity in all of them, including Catholicism, But Christianity is kind of a spoiled religion in this sense. Now, once you start getting into like Mormonism and things like that, where they have additions to their canon, then you can start, you start losing the traction of what I'm getting at here. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have something like Islam, right? And when you want to say something like Islam is this or Islam is that, we miss the mark so often when I hear people talk, unless they're absolutely like highly qualified Islamic scholars, because in Islam you do not have the sort of things that you have with Catholicism. In Islam, it's very simplified, right? You have the five pillars. It's pretty much what you have, right? So if you believe the Shahada, right? If you say that there is no God but God, and you believe Muhammad's a prophet, if you do the prayers, if you fast at Ramadan, if you tithe to the poor, if you make an effort to make the Hajj, then all things considered, you're a Muslim, okay? And you might have a vast array of opinions about various things within Islam that this guy over here may believe is totally contradictory to what this guy over here may believe, and you are still, in all honesty, an Orthodox Muslim. So when we try to classify these things, it helps us to sort of wrap our minds around it, but it doesn't get into the complexity of, how can somebody like, Ahmed, my nice neighbor up the street, who's an extremely kind and compassionate and God-fearing man, how can I compare him to somebody like Osama bin Laden, right? It doesn't even seem like it's the same religion in some ways, and yet we classify them all as Muslims, right? So history is full of examples like this. I think it is helpful to have certain classifications at times to guide us in a particular track of study, but you always have to be willing to step back from it and say, okay, um, just take an example of something like the Reconquista, right? I just recently did a video on the Reconquista with Our Lady of Covadonga, right? And please go watch that. I was kind of hoping more people would end up watching that one because I really want Our Lady of Covadonga to be more well known. But anyways, when you start talking about something like the Reconquista, the first thing I want to say about it is I engage in the passing on of myth. It's a whole nother separate topic, and I might do a quick history study tips on myth. I engage in it as much as the next person, okay? And I want you all to, especially if you have children, to engage in it and pass on these stories, because it sort of helps. I think it helps lift us up culturally. But the objective scientific historian in me wants to step back from it and say, okay, when I'm talking about something like the Reconquista, I have to keep in mind that from this period, of the 8th century to the 15th century, I want to classify that as the Reconquista. But at times, there is no concerted effort to gain back the Iberian Peninsula by Christians. As often as not, it's actually Christians working with Muslims against other Christians. And that's just a fact of reality. So when we're trying to say that this period is a concerted effort by Christian knights to crusade against Muslims and take back our Christian land, it's just not reality, right? Another example I want to give to this, and this is what I'll end with. This is by way of analogy, but hopefully it's kind of helpful to help you kind of get your mind around what I'm getting at here. Is when I was an undergrad in college, university, I was actually a biology major, and one of the classes that I took was a field ecology class where we had to go out into the field and collect data. It was a nightmare class. It was actually one of the hardest classes I've ever taken. But anyways, the university owned this little plot of land next to the river. And it was however many acres, 20, 30, 40 acres, whatever. It was this like center that the university owned that classes could go there and do preparation for studying for certain ecological field work. Well, we were tasked, I mean, this is undergrad stuff, right? So it's not that like, we're not that complicated at this point, but we were tasked with going out there and say we were making samples of the river. Well, and then we would have to return back and write papers based on the data that we collected about what was in the river. Well, the problem that and I knew this right away, right? The problem that I had with it was that when you're dealing with this little chunk of land and you're trying to make a statement about ecological processes on this grand scale, you miss just how chaotic and complex ecology is. Because let's just say, for example, I collected from the river right there, and I found some type of like polluted um, like a chemical within the water right there. Well, if I were to go back and make an analysis on how the James River was polluted, I could miss the fact that maybe right across from the center. There was this rich person's home, and their landscaping was poorly done, and there's a lot of runoff. Their chemicals are dumped into the river right there, which dumps across over to the center. So I'm trying to, and it's isolated to this one little pocket of an area, and I'm trying to make these like grand generalized statements about things that are much larger and much more complex. I'm not really actually doing true science at that point, right? So with history, I just want you guys to keep in mind that all of the things that we take for granted, be it the Crusades or the Reconquista or certain wars and certain factionalisms and Protestants against Catholics and the wars of religion, right? That kind of thing. Any of these things are classifications, and they oversimplify the complex reality of what life was like on the ground. One more example that I'll give you before I leave you with: think about how 100 years from now, how are people going to write books about the Donald Trump presidency? We know he had one, maybe he'll have two. We don't know yet, right? But there's going to be a broad spectrum of analysis on the Trump presidency and the Trump phenomenon, right? 100, 200 years from now, they're going to be like discussing, like, wow, it was a crazy thing that took place. And there's going to be, certain like classifications of Trump supporters that we butcher. I feel like to this day, and I'm not giving my opinion here on Trump either way, but one thing I will say is that so many people, even right now, completely get wrong what the Trump phenomenon was and where it came from. And they're trying to classify, like, well, his supporters were racists when, Trump took Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, which the previous two elections had voted for Barack Obama. So, anyways, right, these classifications that we make on all things with history are grave oversimplifications. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoy this. Take care. God bless you all.